Hi, I'm Darcy Pumphrey, the Digital Assets Librarian at USU Libraries. So back in 2021, during CIMA's annual conference, which was virtual, Clint Pumphrey and I gave a presentation on the Northwestern band of the Shoshone Nation Digital Archive, which for the remainder of this talk, I'll abbreviate as NWBSN. So at the time of the presentation, we had received the digital files during the early days of the pandemic, and we're in the early stages of determining how best to proceed. The presentation today is an update on the digital archive and what has been going on since we last presented to CIMA on the topic. So I'll go over a brief project background to help set the stage for the rest of our presentation and to acknowledge so much of the work that went into collecting and creating this digital archive before USU became a partner. So May Timbimbu Perry, who passed away in 2007 at the age of 87, was a tribal historian for many years. And as Darren told us during the keynote this morning, in high school, she started writing down all the stories she heard from tribal elders while growing up, and she devoted much of her life to recording the tribe's history. May's niece, Patty Timbimbu Madsen, carried on that tradition and was the driving force behind the establishment of the tribal library together with Darren Perry, who's May's grandson and the former tribal chairman. Then Paula Watkins, who's a friend of the tribe, she has volunteered a lot of her time to working with Patty and Darren on the many grants from organizations listed on this slide. These grants have funded many oral history transcription and translation projects, cemetery projects, digitization. And then Paula, with her husband Richard, did a service mission at the church history library from 2013 to 2015, where they were tasked by Scott Christensen to locate all the documents in the church archives related to the Northwestern Shoshone settlement in Washakie and prepare them for the tribe. From 2015 to 2020, Paula collected and organized tribe members' donations of manuscript, audiovisual materials, maps, and photos. She also gathered copies of historical materials from many organizations and institutions such as the National Archives, a number of state historical societies, the Special Collections and Archives at Utah State University, Brigham Young University, University of Utah, Idaho State University, University of Illinois, and others. What do I do? Oh, okay. All right. So USU's involvement. March 2019, representatives from USU Libraries and the NWBSN met to discuss USU hosting the tribal digital library and our digital history collections, and we currently host those in Content DM. And then March 20th, 2020, the hard drive was delivered to USU, and we all know what went down in March 2020. And we were no longer working in the office, and our unit was still trying to figure out and how to communicate about all our work that had stalled out or that needed to somehow move forward, as well as who could physically be in the office and when safely. But we did have a solitary person go up to the office, and they ran a virus check on the hard drive, got everything copied to our server that's backed up by Amazon S3, and created an inventory so we could kind of breathe a little easier at that point. Then December 2020, the first files, about 20 transcripts of oral histories, were uploaded to USU's digital history collections and made publicly available. And the screenshot here is of the original landing page we had for those oral histories. But there are approximately 17,000 files in the digital archive. And when I concluded my presentation with Clint back in 2021, we were figuring out our next steps. We knew that we needed additional assistance in order to properly steward this digital archive and make it available. At the time, we were discussing hiring a consultant, but we ended up going in a different direction when USU's president funded a one-year temporary digital archivist position to focus solely on the NWBSN digital archive. All right. We posted this position back in September 2022. I included some of the job posting here, and some of those responsibilities include assess, organize, and describe digital files for access and preservation, create appropriate metadata, collaborate with staff and student employees on digital object management, including file naming and quality control, and communicate with stakeholders, including members of the NWBSN. And we were so fortunate that Sarah applied. I'm excited for her to share with you in a moment what she has been up to since she started working on this project. But first, a quick summary of the contents of the digital archive. So as I mentioned earlier, there's approximately 17,000 files. At the time of my presentation in 2021, we had about 20 files uploaded into the digital collection. And thanks to Sarah, we now have about 1,200 files live in the digital collection, many more than that processed, and a way better handle on the contents, metadata, and structure of the files. Sarah has also been developing workflows and processes that are making her work more efficient as she tackles the next 15,800 files. She has done a lot of amazing groundwork and documentation to help us continue to steward this digital archive after her position ends. The digital archive includes records copied from archives of a number of different institutions and materials collected from tribe members. The digital archive came to USU organized in 4 sections, which you will also hear Sarah mention. So we have MS, which is the manuscript. This is all text documents, such as journals, articles, excerpts from larger works, life stories, and letters. The AV, so there's some MP4, MP3, DVDs, the audio cassettes and other media, and then photographs, so some individual photographs or some photo collections, and then maps, such as some historical, government, and locally generated maps. So, and with Sarah's work, there's now this new landing page that contains way more information and context about the digital archive. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Sarah, so she can share what she has been working on.
I don't like having to stretch my neck like that. I feel like I need a big stick. Okay, well, thank you, Darcy, for the great overview of the project and the introduction. Let's see, my name's Sarah Berry. I am the digital archivist for the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone Nation Project. All right, so I'm going to be looking at 2 different places here. All right, so when I began working on this project, the first thing I did was read everything, every piece of documentation that I could find. I spent hours looking through these materials. I mean, days, weeks, probably. But I was blown away by the incredible collection of artifacts that were contained in this drive. I was also very much aware of the work and time that would be necessary to chew through it. The only way that I could see to tackle a project of this size was to develop a detailed and thorough, yet flexible plan and manageable workflow in relation to our resources. So I'm going to change this slide. Oh, there it is. Okay. So there's a little image screenshot of part of the workflow plan. I wrote up a project plan with our goals and general deliverables that would be necessary to organize, curate, preserve, describe, and catalog approximately 17,000 files. I also created a full inventory in Airtable, and there is a cult, and thank you to, I was going to explain what Airtable is, but now I don't have to. So there's my little Airtable snapshot of the one that I created. And I did this at the file folder, the parent folder level. And I had to do it by hand manually. So there's some 600 files in this Airtable. But this Airtable represents all of the smaller collections and series that make up the tribal library. My inventory mirrors the original organization of the tribal library's files, and this took some thought. I decided to end up going with the original organization. So it includes the cataloging system names, which would be PH1, 2, 3, MS, and so on. Here you see just photos. That's what I've been working on. So you've got the folder name, the original name of the folder, number of files in each parent folder, and so on and so forth. But in this graphic, you can see, let's see, total number of files in each parent folder. I also included known provenance, copyright, other documentation. The purpose of this was to be able to track the progress of each folder as they are organized and processed using my workflow plan. The next step was to create informal user personas to guide the future organization and description of the digital collection. Who will be using the materials? What will they want to see? What will help them navigate the collection? This was vital to the metadata and description stage, which I'll discuss in more depth in a few minutes. Not pictured here is a working document, which would be the guidelines and procedures. because as we are doing a project like this, I'm creating policy and standards. And really, I'm hoping that when this position ends, the project will not, but it will continue to move forward, although I may not be around to do it. So, okay. So when doing a project like this, a digital project, documentation is key. And these resources ensure the project will run efficiently and address any issues or questions that may arise in the future. Some of the NWBSN resources I have used throughout the project include the Tribal Library MARC. Oops, I gotta use this. There we go. Okay, Tribal Library MARC file, and they did a word inventory, just a Word document with descriptions of some of the collections, but they're not the file level, it's just collection level. Let's see. And I also relied heavily on the expertise of tribal librarians and the council members themselves. We also created our own internal documentation. In addition to the Airtable inventory I mentioned, we also have a metadata spreadsheet and a master inventory that tracks every digital asset at the file level, including generic data files. Separate tabs in our inventory spreadsheet track duplicates. This is files with duplicate names, but also actual true duplicates. It also tracks restricted items, access level, and culling information. Okay, so here. So this is a screenshot of our master inventory. It's the original file names are on the far left. You can see the new file names where we've changed it according to our file name conventions, which we created for this project. Let's see. We also included the file paths and use status. They're not visible here though. The items in pink are duplicates or files that for whatever reason have been determined do not upload. So using multiple methods, we track which files are actually being uploaded to the digital collection and which ones are not, as well as the rationale for upload status. And this is all done at the item level. So that is a quick overview of the project methodology and workflow process. Okay. So working with this collection poses some unique challenges, especially when culturally sensitive materials are involved. We don't have time to deep dive into each of the challenges we faced, but this is just a short list. So the first is the age-old question: how do we properly preserve born digital materials? Many of the items in the collection are born digital, but many are not, and some have physical copies held off-site. Further, how do we organize versions and duplicates within and across series and sub-collections? Challenges also include outdated controlled vocabularies, identifying people and places, and honoring copyright and third-party sources, while also maintaining tribal intellectual ownership. So before I get into the two specific challenges, let me go back. There we go. I want to point out that everything that I am doing, everything that we're doing here as a team, USU's purpose is to host and handle materials that belong to an Indigenous community. Every choice needs to respect and affirm tribal ownership of the records. We need to use culturally appropriate and accurate language, ensure appropriate access according to the needs and requests of the Shoshone, and we need to maintain respect and build trust between our institutions. So throughout the project, there will always be the underlying question of how can we best serve the Shoshone community with our resources? And how do we uphold archival best practices in a way that will also honor intellectual control and ownership by the tribe? So this brings us to challenge number one: controlled vocabularies and metadata. So who here is familiar with Library of Congress subject headings? Anybody? Oh, good, a lot of people. So you all know that there is nothing wrong with any of these vocabularies, nothing. They're perfect. No, there's some problems there. Because they are controlled, we can only pull from approved vocabularies. It can sometimes be difficult to incorporate culturally sensitive language and terminology. They were often created with an ethnocentric lens, so some of them are very outdated. But it's difficult, but not impossible. So the key has been working directly with tribal librarians and members. If I could send you home with one tip today, it's this. If there's any question, and sometimes even if there's not, just ask. Go to the source, right? I could read every book on the Shoshone culture and all of the items in the drive, and I am not going to be a Shoshone person. So it's absolutely vital that I involve those who are. This comes back to knowing our audience. Who are the records of and who are they for? How would they describe themselves and what terms would they use? Some empathy is required here. I also ask myself, how would I want to be described? My parents, my grandparents, how would I want some institution to handle my family's materials? So where possible, we try to use Shoshone words for places and incorporate Shoshone names and titles. This not only acknowledges true ownership, but it also makes individual records and materials easier to find for the communities who are actually looking for them. So this could be multiple spellings. There's a lot of variety there in spellings of names. We try to include as many variations that we know of somewhere in the metadata. Also, for example, Pocatello, Chief Pocatello, as we know him, his name was actually Tanzaosha. And so in the keywords, in the metadata, we include his given name, his Shoshone name. So once we identified the problematic subject headings, we received input from the tribal council members and found adequate replacements. We created keyword and heading lists for uniformity and consistency. This is important when working with clickable metadata to group things together with uniform spellings. There's a lot more freedom with the keywords, and we can create our own controlled vocabularies to describe things more accurately than the headings that we have available to us. So I identified a few examples of how the concept played out for real objects. First, when coming up with headings for important figures such as Sagwitch, Washakie, Pocatello, and others, we initially used the heading chiefs and rulers. And this is a Library of Congress approved heading. I sent the list of headings out to the tribal librarians. This one was immediately flagged. Chief is a white term, they said. It does not accurately reflect how their leadership structure actually works. And this was very interesting to me because I did not know that. So there are labels on photographs that include the word chief, and those are included in titles and description if necessary, but the actual heading needed to change. So we ultimately settled on leaders. Another example is Boa Ogoi and Wuda Ogwa. Did I say those right, Aaron? These are both Shoshone names for the site of the Bear River Massacre, though they do have different meanings. Incorporating these terms ensures that the collection will be described properly, maintaining a sense of Shoshone authority and control over these materials. So it is not up to me to explain the deep cultural context behind these items, behind these terms. I just don't have the authority to do that, but I can be a facilitator for these conversations by using these terms properly and honoring and respecting cultural nuances as much as possible. Okay, here's my last example. All right, this example is smudging. So this is an image of Rios Pacheco of the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone Nation, and he is performing a public smudging ceremony in 2017. With the help of the tribal library documentation, I learned that the proper term for this particular ceremony was smudging. So you see it in the description, highlighted, and in the keywords. The headings are not ideal, so we used the best ones we could find that were relevant. So we have Bear River Massacre, Idaho, -- anniversaries. I don't love that. That's not my favorite, but it's the one that we could find. But we can use subject keywords to make up for the limitations in the subject headings. So each keyword connects the image to others, making it easier for patrons to find and conduct research. So we here have under keywords, we have Bear River Massacre, Boa Ogoi, the sacred place. We also have the alternate spelling of that, Bia Ogoi, Wuda Ogwa, smudging, and of course, Rios Pacheco. So we can link it to all the other items. And there are so many that using these keywords to our advantage is actually going to help the patrons navigate the collection and also maintain some of the context behind a lot of the items. What you don't see here is the work behind the scenes. I felt really uncomfortable posting photographs of a religious spiritual ceremony without first understanding what it means And second, verifying that it is an image that is appropriate to post publicly. Rios graciously took some time to explain to me the purpose of the smudging ceremony and that it being a public ceremony was appropriate to upload the images. I did some additional research and sent the metadata over to the tribal librarians to review, all to make sure these particular materials were handled correctly. And I liked what Darren said this morning is that you do have to work slow to move fast. I absolutely agree with that. So this is a screenshot of the live landing page with curated browsing lists to make the collection easier to navigate. These topics were approved by the tribal librarians and the council and incorporate many of the terms they use at their library. Take traditional arts, for example. There are many ways to describe Shoshone art, such as leatherwork and beading. But rather than assume I know the term that's best, I just asked, and they suggested traditional arts. So we went with that. And these links function entirely through intentional and uniform use of metadata and controlled vocabularies, especially the keywords. So this brings us to the second challenge I wanted to discuss. Duplicates. This is more technical in nature. So all 6 of these cropped images and photocopies were saved in the same file folder and came from the same physical photo album. Some albums, like this one, have multiple copies of the same photo. In many cases, photos were printed, photocopied, and shared with multiple tribal members who later donated everything back to the tribal library. Some images have been used in multiple special projects and appear in 5, 6 different sub-collections and series. So what we have in our drive is an enormous number of duplicates. So which versions do we upload for public access? How many copies of the same photo is too many in a digital collection? Some copies have names and dates, others don't. So how do we share metadata between them? And how do we avoid redundancy? So I found when we're browsing through a list of items, it doesn't look too good to see 7 copies of the exact same image, especially because content management systems like Content DM remove original organizational context. When a large collection of materials from different sources are put together in one place, the system organizes alphabetically by title or even subject. So the presence of duplicates may normally not be an issue if they're scattered through multiple physical collections, but in digital space, it's very noticeable. So the solution that I came up with is to do one of 3 things. First is mark a file as a duplicate and not upload it. Second is to bundle multiple versions of the same photograph into one multi-page PDF access file. Or 3, upload more than one version of the same photograph as unique objects. And it's not always easy to decide which path to take. So this is a checklist. Oops, wrong one. There we go. So this is my checklist that I ask myself before I make a decision. Are the images exact duplicates, cropped photos, or distinct versions? Does this item have research value? What is the provenance? Do the photographs originate from the same collection, or were they acquired from multiple distinct sources? Do the items share identical metadata? How were these files originally organized? What was the intent of the creator of both the original files and the digital copies? Is the image of good quality? Okay, here is a real example. So this is just one of many photographs that appear in a lot of places throughout the collection. Some are scans of original physical copies, some are printed paper copies, some are photocopies of one of the other 2. All of these images are from the same file folder and originated from the May Tim Bimbu Perry collection. They came to us organized this way. They share metadata, provenance, and they came from the same source. So what do? So look at the images on the left. And by the way, this is such a great photo. Maybe I should just tell you what's going on. A group of people from Washakie went down to Salt Lake City, and there they are on a tour. Isn't that great? I love this picture. So the one on the left, one is a cropped version. Another is a photocopy that has names written on the back. And because they came from the same file folder, share provenance, and have limited research value on their own, I created a PDF access file to upload it as its own item in Content DM. However, the images on the right are the recto verso scans of a physical object that has not been cropped. Even though they were organized in the same folder as the others, I decided not to bundle it into that same PDF and instead treat it as a separate and distinct artifact. And a lot of that has to do with the handwriting on the back. So it is separate and distinct, not cropped. So these two files are both uploaded and live in the USU collection. They are separate, but they do have matching metadata. So I have found there is no one-size-fits-all solution to the problem of duplicates and digital versions. Each decision needs to be made on an individual basis. Some decisions have been simple ones, some have been pretty agonizing, but at the end of the day, it all comes back to balancing best practices with cultural stewardship and collaboration. That has been the guiding principle behind all of my work on this project so far. So next steps. So to date, 7,000 files in the photograph collection have been processed using these workflows. And duplicates, restricted items, other items have been culled. They've been identified as do not upload. Some collections have been culled and curated for quality. And I've also matched orphaned backs and fronts of photographs. So of those 7,000, 1,200 items have been uploaded into the USU digital collection and are currently live. It's probably closer to 1,300 now, though. Photograph collections and albums are almost complete. And now we are in the process of transitioning to manuscripts. Let's see. We are going to continue. We've been working with the Church History Library. So we're working with NWVSN Tribal Library and the Church History Library to review copyright for church-owned manuscript materials. And we did the same for the photo collections as well. They have a number of photos in their collection that they so willingly shared, some of the better scans. So they did a review to make sure that we could get the best quality scans. And next step is also to identify which oral history audiovisual files need transcripts and closed captioning for ADA compliance. So we've got a lot done, but we've got a lot more still to do. So we made some great progress with this project, and I am so honored and grateful to be a part of it. And I'm so happy that I was able to share a tiny sample of it with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for presenting. It's excellent. We have plenty of time for questions. So just a reminder that if you're asking or answering a question, please wait for a microphone. If you're on, or you can come up here and talk. If you're on Zoom, please put a question in the Q&A and I will read it out with a microphone to the group.
This question is for Sarah. I work at the Church History Library. I'm fairly familiar with the tools that we use there, and I understand that a lot of those digital items were sent to you. I was wondering, in our system, we have the digital item, the photograph, and then we have separate metadata that supports that. So but I don't know of a way in our system to get that metadata to you. So what did you do about the metadata?
So most of my metadata is actually done manually.
Okay.
So if there's a MARC file available, if someone can send it to me, I'm happy with that. It's a place to start, but nearly all of it has been done manually.
That's good to know. We're just putting together some specifications for our new system, and that will be one of them. Is to make sure that we have a way to export the metadata that we add to those.
Great. Thank you.
So I have two questions, and they're both about access. So how do you access the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone Nation Digital Archive? Is it publicly accessible at this point? And I would love to personally see how to access that list of terms, because I think that could be really helpful to others. And is that publicly accessible?
That is a great question. And that is something I really should have done. I should have put a link to our collection, right? Didn't even think about that. We have a couple ways to get to it. Typically, I mean, you could even go to the USU collection, digital collections, and search for the Northwestern Band of Shoshone Nation, and you can probably find it that way. But the easiest way is if you do go to dig.lib,
digital.lib.usu.edu.
we'll maybe find a way to get this out there. But yeah, you can go there and you can scroll through all of the different collections on there. It's alphabetized. So if you go down to N, you'll see Northwestern Band of the Shoshone Nation. And at the end of this project, I will hopefully have 2 separate collections. One will be for all the photographs and manuscripts, and the other will be for just the oral histories and some of the AV. And what was that all of your question? Did you have any? Oh, right now, those are all internal. It's just something that we've had approved, things that we've been working on as we create metadata. So when I've got a student assistant that I have refer back to this list to make sure we're using the same spelling. For example, cradle boards, we want to make sure that we're using that, or dogs versus pets, or the right terms, and using the same spelling of names for the clickable version of the metadata. Whereas in the description field, it may have the varying forms and the varying spellings, but there is one that's determined as the uniform one. And we do have a list to track all that, but right now it is all just internal. But that's an interesting thought to have a list. I'll think about that.
Other questions?
My question is for the person sitting next to me, Jessica. I was wondering, so you kind of went through the steps of what you did for the survey, but I was wondering if maybe you could speak some to what the results of your survey were, what you did in terms of updating finding aids or posting things on your website about access, things like that.
So we've been through all of the records that we had at the time, and I have been adding to them as we catalog new collections. So I add a survey record for everything. We have a page dedicated to protocols and working with Indigenous materials. Of all of our collections, it was really interesting because it's only about 3% of our collection, but it was physically, it's like a third of our linear footage. So it's about 4,000 linear feet are implied of our 12,000 linear feet in this project. So we've got a lot of Indigenous materials. Because in the 1970s, they worked with anthropologists to try to collect this. So there's a lot there. And so we've created a web portal for researchers for Indigenous groups. And we are beginning to work on reports that are identified. This is for the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe, for the Nuwa, the Timbisha group. And there's some other interesting parts. We actually have to go back in and physically look at materials to identify, oh, this is Shoshone, but who is this? This is Paiute, but who is this? So there's a lot to go still, but we have been working on trying to have our researchers, when we think something is culturally sensitive, having them work with the tribes and work with the tribal representatives that we have relationships with. So it's an ongoing process, and I don't think it's anything we're ever going to truly finish, because we're constantly learning, becoming better, creating more relationships, helping build trust between the archive and the communities, and create more of those reports is the big part, and let people know we have things that's yours. I think it was 74 tribes that we identified. I think it was something like that. So
Go ahead and hold on to that because I have a question from Zoom, which is for both groups. One of the concerns I've heard about enacting the protocols as a public university is our responsibility to not restrict materials based on classes or categories of people. We do all or nothing. We acknowledge that there may be some material out there for which it would be most appropriate to restrict access to tribal members. How do you recommend balancing this?
I work with a lot of restricted materials, so that's a great question. Really key is just working directly with the Indigenous group in which those materials are related to. So working with the Shoshone, there's been certain items, it varies. There are some religious ceremonies that are completely and totally off limits. We don't post them, and they're restricted to tribal members only. And so those item by item, we just restrict them, and we've documented them as such in a variety of ways. There's other things that may have, for example, I was telling somebody earlier, there are pictures of children that are at a private activity or family members that we do not have the rights to post those things. We don't have release forms for each and every individual in those photographs. So those are considered restricted and tribal member only. So right now we're documenting them and just holding onto them and keeping them as preservation. But we, just to make sure that they don't accidentally get put somewhere where they aren't supposed to be, we mark them at the file level. So we name them _ restricted. We document them in our inventories. We document them in the Airtable as do not use. So we just make sure that there's some redundant documentation there to make sure that these materials are handled the proper way. And we have explored, though we aren't taking it in this direction quite yet, the possibility, I know, of being able to access certain restricted items in the reading rooms or things like that, that are specifically for tribal members. There are also ways that you can work with the tribes and determine which things are considered traditional knowledge and who should have access. There's certain folk tales or coyote stories, for example, that cannot be told unless there's snow on the ground. And so you have to be aware of each Indigenous group's specific requirements and honoring those the best that our resources allow. Do you have any?
I think you've covered it really, really well. And I think it's just that you have to remember to center that we are centering the Indigenous voice, not the white settler voice. And it is not I do not have the right to decide what is culturally sensitive and what needs to be protected information. That belongs to the Indigenous peoples. And in archives, yeah, we don't want to restrict things across the board. We want to create access. And it is a balance, but creating those relationships and that trust with the Indigenous peoples and making sure that researchers are asking questions. And we've had researchers upset with us. But at the end of the day, it's not our knowledge to share. It is their knowledge to tell us, yes, this is okay to go out. So I think it's building trust so that you can get to the point to talk about that. And potentially talk about repatriation as well. I think that's something that needs to be talked about, and sometimes materials just do need to be returned to the tribe.
Thank you for those really detailed and helpful answers. Are there more questions? Okay. I think we're free to be done a little bit early again. So let's give our presenters another round of applause.